going to take us back about 200 years. I'm looking at the impact of the Fancy Maid Trade, which I will explain soon. My broader interests are in class stratification in African American communities in the 19th century American South, and this is just one manifestation of conflict. So my presentation looks at social cohesion and dissociation within enslaved and free Black communities in Antebellum, New Orleans, and Natchez, through the lenses of kinship and sexual freedom and bondage. I argue that within the context of the commodification of Black women's bodies in the slave trade, sexual liaisons across class and color lines complicated ties within enslaved and free Black families and undermined ideals of masculinity in their communities. The Fancy Maid Trade in New Orleans sanctioned, commodified, and promoted the systematic rape of female slaves, fueled enmity based on cross-class sexual ties, and attached negative connotations to Black women's participation in the market. Selling goods such as vegetables and fruits was often an unpredictable, unprofitable, and physically draining enterprise. Letters between free Black women in New Orleans and Natchez indicate that without support networks in rural areas, city residents may have had a difficult time paying for basic items. Prostitution may have been a viable alternative for single free women of color or a means to supplement their incomes. An abundance of single white merchants in the region sustained the market of commodified sex. While in Natchez, traveler Joseph Holt Ingraham mused about the common practice of East Coast men leaving their wives behind to try and stake a claim in the West. Quote, unluckily for every six out of every seven of the fair daughters of the East, the pioneers of the West feel disposed to pass their lives in all the solitary dignity of the bachelor state. Wrapped up in their speculations, their cigars, and their clubs, not even a second Sabine device could move them to bend their reluctant necks to the noose. End quote. According to Ingraham, the bachelors were so content with their singlehood that nothing could induce them to the noose, a euphemism for marriage. The second Sabine device references the rape and subsequent marriage of neighboring Sabine women by ancient Romans in order to populate their burgeoning, predominantly male city. What became known as the rape of the Sabine women served to reclaim and reinforce the Romans' masculinity and to assert their power over the region. Though similar to Rome as nascent cities with a dearth of marriageable women, in Antebellum, Natchez, and New Orleans, transient bachelors define their masculinity in terms of their speculations, their cigars, and their club, not by marriage. Ingraham's second Sabine device conjured a hypothetical situation where the bachelor merchants would take and marry local women among them in order to populate the surrounding area. These men did not intend to stake a claim to local citizenship and played a significant role in sustaining the market of commodified sex. Sex work engendered power struggles within Black communities, as selling merchandise in the market, reuniting with family, and property ownership figured prominently in slaves' contemplations of freedom. And for enslaved men, marriage incorporated all of these aspirations in its connection to ownership of a woman's labor. Single free women of color who supported themselves through the sale of their bodies went against the terms of freedom that men often defined, and could not avoid negative implications of promiscuity, born of the sale and sexual violation of enslaved women. Sexual unions across color and class lines engendered moral judgment of women within free Black communities. Free Black elites did not escape these ideological ties to the fancy trade. The aims of refinement and respectability of the mixed-race daughters of wealthy white Creoles and free Black mistresses took on a sexual tone to outside observers. Many enslaved and free people of color protested interracial unions through verbal denouncements, letters, diary entries, and physical force. While the literature suggests that a tripartite caste system exists in Antebellum, New Orleans, wide economic and social gaps existed between people within each class. Judgment often centered on sexual liaisons outside of one's own racial or social group. Marie Brown, a free woman of color, exclaimed, quote, "No, I never went in that quarterly ballroom. You couldn't get in if you had a black face. We colored people wouldn't have gone if we could. We had no use for that strike. End quote. Associated with illicit ties between free women of color and white men, whether in reality or in popular imagination, the quadroon balls took on a distasteful connotation to Marie Brown, and she scorned those who participated in them. Class enmity also existed within families. Brown spoke of her sister, quote, "She's like white, and her family passed for white folks. She thinks I'm good enough for her, but I say she ain't good enough for me, for she's only white man's slavings." End quote. Brown's father had been a slave, and it appears that she and her sister shared the same mother, but that her sister's father was white. That she called her sister white man's slavings implies that this father was uninvolved with the family, and her sister put on airs despite the fact that she was unwanted. Emphasizing her pride in embracing her formerly enslaved father, Brown exposed her sister's dissociation from both her black family and her white forebears. Her disdain for her sister's white father may have stemmed from her correlation of interracial sex with the economic, legal, and social disfranchisement free women of color endured in interracial relationships, and as such represented a protest against these unions. Though free women of color often benefited financially from interracial unions, opportunistic bachelors commonly took advantage of their economic resources. These freeloading men seem to have emulated idle upper-class white males who lived off the labor of their slaves and promoted sexual access to their slave women. Whereas Southern planters created a false aura of nobility and honor, the community freely exposed the dependency of the men outside of the social class. According to one court case over a property dispute, witnesses confirmed that a working-class white man named Bell lived with a free woman of color, Marie Connolly, who owned a shop in New Orleans and who had recently died. The record reads, quote, "From the time when Bell went to live with the deceased, he occupied himself about the house, went to market, and attended the shop. One of the witnesses says that Bell was considered as a loafer, kept and entertained by Marie Connolly." End quote. A loafer might have aspired to mimic the behavior of the wealthiest men in society by living off the fruits of a woman's work. Yet in the absence of wealth of his own, the relationship turned on its head. A loafer became a kept man. The testimony of the witness who exposed Bell's dependency reveals that 19th century racial and gender constructs upended in the context of relationships where a free black woman supported a working-class white man. Sources indicate that the free black community members desired that the women in their social circles enter into legitimate marriages with an economically dependable man who shared their social status. But marriage also had an important role in dissociating free black women from connotations of promiscuity. Free woman of color, Lavinia McCary, lamented in a letter to Ann Johnson, quote, "Well, Annie Amy is married. She got married last Wednesday, and she's 4 months gone in the family way. The same day her mom found it out, she had her married right out. They had not one chair bought, and he is a high-living fellow, Ann. He has a trade but won't work. Now she will have them both to support." End quote. McCary seemed resigned to the necessity of Annie's marriage, even though it seemed likely that Annie would have to support her idle husband. Her letter shows that even in cases where a man may not have been willing or able to provide for his wife, the necessity of distancing oneself from one's female kin from an accusation of lascivious behavior outweighed the concern that a woman would have to support her husband. Free black communities of New Orleans and Natchez cautioned against marriages that represented a downgrade in status for their daughters and female friends, which could result in inter-community social tensions. A free black barber in Natchez, William Johnson, wrote in his diary that his neighbor had chained his daughter to his property to prevent her from marrying one Mr. Burke, a wood chopper. Ironically, Baylor Wynn had imprisoned his daughter in order to prevent her from a descent in social status that would have brought her closer to slavery. Wynn had probably been passing as white, which most likely augmented his concern for his daughter's marital choice. While Wynn may have distanced himself from his neighbors by passing as white and by claiming property that belonged to Johnson, he also distanced himself from his daughter in his attempt to prevent her marriage. Having escaped from her restraints, Wynn's daughter ran to the Johnson's property, Hardscrabble, which probably heightened the tensions within the Wynn family and between the neighbors, It is unclear if the other woman's daughter wound up marrying Mr. Burke after all. Courts bent the law to serve the interests of white heirs in an attempt to normalize the tenets of white supremacy in a society in which legally unsanctioned interracial unions commonly occurred. Ironically, this often undermined the legal contracts of white men who willed their estates to black family members. This interpretation of the law also bore ill tidings for mistresses, concubines, and illegitimate children. Evidence of industrious behavior could prove beneficial to free women of color who entered extramarital liaisons with white men. In a case where the court upheld a woman's right to the property of her deceased lover, witnesses vouched for her economic self-sufficiency. The record cited the industriousness of the woman's children, the reputable socioeconomic position of her family who consented to her relationship, and her excellent line of credit in the dry goods market. This woman benefited from the court's perception of her self-sufficiency, which suggests that the larger community aimed to prevent women from manipulating men with sex for monetary gain, as it served to undermine the social and economic relationship between a white man and his concubine. In the upper echelons of free black society, some men were marginalized in the interest of promoting the chastity, respectability, and marriageability of their sisters and friends. Eliza Potter, a free black hairdresser who catered to this demographic, described an event, seemingly a type of debutante ball, given by a very white, wealthy Creole, a white man with a, quote, brown-skinned mistress and a mixed-race daughter. Potter described his son as very handsome, yet he did not participate in the party, quote, nor did any colored man take any part in the proceedings unless in the capacity of a servant. He kept his own room, or once or twice was seen moving about the house, but having nothing to do with the affairs of the house, as it is a strange fact among these mixed Creoles that the boys are never taken notice of in public, end quote. This handsome brother most likely faded into the backdrop of the party in the family's interest of showcasing his sister. This practice may have had roots in the white culture of the region. As Joseph Holt Ingraham claimed, quote, less attention is paid to the mental or personal cultivation of the male youth of this state than to that of the females. Many planters are opposed to giving their sons, whom they destined to succeed them as farmers, the classical education, end quote. Further, court cases reveal that mixed-race sons who expected to inherit from their white fathers often lost these inheritances to white heirs. Without an education and with a precarious claim to the estate, free men of color with white fathers risked uncertain futures. Another explanation for the brother maintaining his distance at the party could have involved negative perceptions of black male sexuality. As Sarah and Rolfe notes, in the 1830s, pro-slavery advocates and abolitionists, quote, popularized the conceptualization of black men as dangerous savages bent on the destruction of whites, end quote. Revealing the great efforts that went into ensuring the chaste reputation of the mixed-race daughters of wealthy white Creoles, Eliza Potter asserted that they, quote, are never permitted to walk out to church or school or any other place without a servant after them, end quote. The fact that their sons remained hidden at these parties might have had something to do with these efforts, and with white guests in attendance. The presence of a wealthy young black male in the context of his sister's debut may have suggested the potential for an interracial union between the son and any white ladies at the gathering. Perhaps in the interest of distancing their daughters from any connotations of the stereotype of black female promiscuity, these families consciously strove to diminish their sons' public presence. Within the context of the commodification of black women's bodies in the slave trade, sexual liaisons across class and color lines complicated internal ties within free black families and undermined ideals of masculinity in their communities. Many enslaved and free people of color protested interracial unions through verbal denouncements, letters, diary entries, and physical force. Future studies of interracial unions in the Antebellum era might further explore the emasculation of both enslaved and free black males, along with the inter-community tensions and resistance that went along with it. Thank you.